And after Holly, we will hear from Vicki Oldham about Newtown Alive, sustaining a historic treasure. Vicki is a storyteller and journalist who has produced multiple community-themed documentaries and shorts. Her latest work, Newtown Alive, begun as an initiative to trace the 100-year history of the African-American community of Newtown, which allowed residents and guests to view the neighborhood through the lens of its rich history. Vicki started her career as a reporter at WWSB, Sarasota's ABC television affiliate, after earning a bachelor's degree from the University of Florida and a master's degree from Florida State University. Again, welcome our first speaker, Holly Bullard.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me and United Way Suncoast at your event today. And I know today is all about sustainability, and what we're going to talk about today from my perspective is financial sustainability. And you'll see really the interplay of transportation. I heard a lot about that, transportation, environment, and also really the key around energy and utilities for our low to moderate income families in Sarasota. And first, I'd like to just see a show of hands really quick. Has anyone heard of the ALICE report before from United Way? So right, thank you so much for your interest in that. The ALICE report is something that United Ways of Florida actually got together in 2012. We heard so much around financial instability in our community, around a lot of the effects of the recession, and what we saw was that the data wasn't really matching up to what the stories were in the community, that there were families that were making what you would think would be a solid wage, but in terms of the cost of living, not really getting by, not really getting ahead. And so what we did, we looked at the data and we thought, the federal poverty level really is not a good measure. We didn't feel that it was very accurate in terms of our community, and definitely not across the state of Florida, that it wasn't really a good measure. And as we heard a little bit around food stamps before and other kind of federal programs, well, guess what? A lot of those have to do with that measure, that's the federal poverty level, whether it's 100% or 200% of that number. A program or eligibility for a lot of those programs has to deal with that, whether it be housing or other kind of assistance, childcare assistance often. We use that as a benchmark. But what is the federal poverty level really? Where does it come from? And so some of our policy wonks in the room may know its origins from the mid-'60s. So the mid-1960s is when the federal government determined that they were going to see, well, how can we measure poverty and what kind of formula would we look at? And they looked at what the families of the 60s spent their money on. And for some of us thinking through, as economies have changed and how we spend money much differently now, it's very different. In the 60s, folks spent a lot more and a higher percentage of their budgets on things like clothing and food, and a lot less on things like healthcare and childcare. And so those are some big ticket items now that our families, especially our ALICE families, look at. So what we wanted to do is to say, well, we know the federal poverty level, one, is outdated as a formula, and two, it's one single number for the entire contiguous United States. That is really silly. And in a high-cost area like Sarasota, we know that Sarasota County and maybe Polk County or Ocala, that one federal poverty level is it treats all of those economies and communities the same, where we know that our history and our story here is different in terms of the different costs. So what ALICE does is really interesting in terms of our local economy. It looks at what our local community is faced with, what our local families are faced with in terms of costs, and it's different by community. So that's very important to remember. It's different by community, and that we use data from all these different federal databases for all of these items you see here. So when we look at Sarasota County, we say, well, what is the lowest amount of rent that we see for a family for housing? We use the 40% of the area median rent. For that number, it's very conservative. Childcare is going to be the cheapest legal available childcare. So this is home-based. This is not the childcare that you really want your children to go to have that high-quality learning. This is very low number. Food is extremely extremely tight. This is BOGOs, this is couponing, this is not eating out. So as you can see, these are the very, very basics of just getting by. And this is the budget that we look at compared to the federal poverty level 1960s budget. And we use some federal numbers with the University of Rutgers to look at county by county in Florida, how does it change by community in terms of what does it cost. Now, very importantly, there's lots of things missing from this, right? In terms of a family thinking through building assets for your family, investing in education, investing in a home, down payment. Where is their savings in this budget? Where is their payment for tutoring for your kids, investment in your own education? It's not here. This is very much the basic, and everything above that, that's where you can start to save or invest. This is a very basic ALICE budget. Now, ALICE is an acronym. It's a name for sure, and that's why we are very conscious that it's a name, because we all know ALICE, but it's also an acronym. It stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. So what we found in Sarasota County, and you can see that this is very, very minimal. This is a very minimal budget in terms of a family of 4 especially. 2 adults, 1 infant, 1 preschooler. $960 for housing. Where are you going to find that in Sarasota County? That's the most minimal piece. So even regarding that this is such a very minimal budget, we still find that that a large percentage of Sarasota County falls within what we call the ALICE threshold. They fall underneath this income level. And so for a family of 4, that's $56,520 in Sarasota County. And very importantly, the child care number here, $1,153. That is more than rent for that family, and in every single county in Florida, childcare is more than rent in our counties, and that's one of our critical issues that we see. So trends in Sarasota. Since 2007 to 2015, you see a growth in our households. And then across this report, the yellow dots are absolute number of households, so the absolute number versus percentage in the blue. The middle blue is our ALICE families. Those ALICE meaning that they live above the federal poverty level, which is the dark blue, but still beneath that critical number where they're actually getting enough to get by in our community. You can see that we're getting better, but we're not quite back to pre-recession levels in our community. And importantly, 33% of Sarasota County residents live beneath the ALICE threshold, meaning 1 in 3 families don't make enough to invest or save or to get ahead. And so importantly, I think of income as what you need to get by day to day. But assets, that asset limited of ALICE, that AL and ALICE is really critical. Assets are what you need to get ahead, to invest, to build over time. And this means that 1 in 3 of our families don't make enough to build any assets to move their family further along the prosperity ladder. So how do we compare to the rest of the state? ALICE is great because this is apples to apples. We're not using an arbitrary number like the federal poverty level. We're actually looking locally, what does it cost here? And you can actually compare us to not only us, but other states, Florida, you compare county by county. So you can see the change from 2007 to 2015 in different communities. And Sarasota County is one that we've improved slightly since the recession. But you see some other areas like Miami and Orlando, where actually it's a increase in ALICE from different immigration forces, lots of different demographic forces. I'm going to move pretty quickly through some data and have some questions later. You can see each community is differently, and each of our counties has gone through the recession in different ways. In Sarasota, we've improved in total families to 33%, but other areas are not so lucky, like Pinellas County, which has actually increased their poverty rate. Even more minute, right? You can look even more granularly into our communities. So you see that in somewhere like the Sarasota County Census designated place, 40% ALICE, 51% Kensington Park, compared to Siesta, 26% fall. Still 26% fall beneath the ALICE threshold there. I'm very grateful to Sarasota County folks because they helped in terms of mapping this, because every time I show those numbers before, it's always nice to have a visual. Granted, these are very small words, and I apologize, but just to see the visual of where Alice is, and it does track poverty rate, but just to know that there's more families there who are working, sometimes 2-3 jobs, just as folks sometimes in poverty are also doing that, but that it's still day to day 1 in 3 of our residents. Different families experience Alice differently. Here you actually see that single male-headed households have a higher percentage of Alice. And my last point that I'd like to make is really around looking deeper at our data, that Sarasota County itself is getting better. We're also getting more diverse. So you see Sarasota County from 1990 to 2014, we're becoming a more diverse population. But that actually, when you look at who's being affected by the economy and who's doing better, actually, even though Sarasota County, we have a lower Alice percentage than Pinellas County and some other counties, you see that the discrepancy between our communities, between our African American communities, Asian communities, Hispanic, that the gap, the discrepancy between them is broader, is wider than Pinellas County. Pasco County is fairly equitable. So the inequities that we see are really only uncovered when we disaggregate and look deeper into our data, and that's something that United Way is really adamant about. We'd love to share more data. We have lots of information, and any of this you all can share. We'd love to work with our community partners on mapping Alice and our economic data.